Well, welcome to another episode of Low Gear, and with me is Warren. And Warren, your claim to fame is building warbird aeroplanes, and in particular what we've got here is a Mosquito.
Yeah.
And you've built two already. This is number 3. So perhaps just tell us a little bit, first of all, about what you do.
Well, so the company's called AvSpecs. We've got 15 staff, and we are pretty much dedicated to World War II airplane restoration. We've been in business since 1997, so 20 years now. Is that right? 30 years. 20 years. We have done P-40 Kitty Hawks and Spitfires, and now we're sort of into Mosquitoes at the moment, which is a good thing because they're big jobs.
Yeah.
So the de Havilland Mosquito, I don't know, you know, you're familiar with it at all, obviously.
Well, only what you've seen in the films.
An English design. Yeah. Unusual because it's built, the airframe's built entirely out of wood, which was a real breakaway from how things were going at the beginning of World War II. But there was a specification put out by the Air Ministry in the UK for a high-speed unarmed bomber, and the de Havilland company had perfected a form of a composite construction using plywood and balsa on a small airliner that they made prior to the war called the Albatross, and they used that same technique to develop the fuselage for the Mosquito, and then built a wooden wing, and eventually convinced the Air Ministry, after demonstrating how fast it was, that it was the way to go. They had a lot of problem getting it into production because, you know, they thought that wood was, you know, obsolete. Yeah. Metal aeroplanes were the way to go, but there was a shortage of metal. Oh, you know, they knew metal was going to be a strategic, you know, product. All the other aeroplanes were being built out of aluminium, so making something out of wood and then utilising the skills of the woodworkers that, you know, had been making furniture for the king, who were sort of unemployed when the war started, using those places to build the Mosquito and all their little factories around England. It worked out real well for them.
Well, so everybody had a job?
Yep, everybody had a job. Wow. Trees were still growing in North America, so yeah. So it turned out to be, for a long time, the fastest aeroplane during World War II. It set a lot of speed and altitude records initially during the war, and got developed into a fighter bomber, and they put a big 55-pound gun in it, and they use it for everything. A real multi-role aeroplane.
So the people who were anti-wood would have gone, wow, didn't expect that.
No, that's right. That's right. Some of the other companies would have been sort of scratching their heads, wondering how they managed to get it done, but they did. They built it very quickly and made 7,600 of them. Most of them in England, but they've made 1,200 in Canada, and then they built them in Australia as well. Wow. During the war.
How far through with this one are you, sort of where we are at the moment, looking at it?
Well, we've been working on it a couple of years now, and we think another 12 months and it'll be finished. Oh, okay. So we're sort of waiting for the engines to come back from the States where they're being overhauled, and we're plumbing it and wiring it, and you know, overhauling the landing gear and building the new fuel tanks, and you know, on and on it goes. On and on.
So you have like a progressive list. This can't be done before you do that, and blah blah blah, and all the way it goes down.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen in order, and you kind of wish you had everything on the shelf and you could just go and get it and fit it when you want to. But you know, that's not how it works. You know, you overhaul things as you go along, because, you know, if you pull it all apart at the beginning, you can never remember how it all went back together again. I mean, we have a lot of drawings and a lot of manuals, but, you know, it's still only our third one, and
sure,
you know,
you're still learning.
We're still learning. Yeah, we're definitely still learning.
I just noticed, sort of in this little bit here and on the wing there, these little copper strips. What's that about?
Yeah, well, because it's a wooden airframe, you can't use the airframe for earth purposes, and so it would build up static electricity as it flies along, and you'd get a crackling in the radios. So they would put the copper strip all around it to bond all of the metal bits together and try and silence that static.
Okay. Warren, just looking at the nozzle, well, this is the sort of the business end, I suppose.
Yeah.
You can see obviously where a pilot's going to sit.
Yeah, so you got the pilot on that side, and then the navigator in this particular airplane's a fighter bomber, so it carried a navigator, and he sat slightly behind the pilot, sort of with his back up against the wing
so
spar.
one there. Sort
Yeah,
of,
so the pilot's slightly forward, because very narrow, even though it's quite a big aeroplane, 54-foot wingspan and 20,000 pounds, it's quite narrow, much narrower than any two-seat aeroplane you might have ever been in, like a little Cessna is actually wider than these. So they staggered the pilot and navigator to give them a bit more shoulder room. And so the navigator would sit on this right-hand side and he'd get down on his knees, and a sort of drift sight would come out through here so he could line the thing up for the bombs. It carried a couple of 500-pound bombs. 303 Browning machine guns on the top here, 4 of those, and the ammunition boxes in here. Big armour plate on here to protect the pilot from forward firing.
So the time you put a couple of machine guns in here,
Yeah.
and then you've got a frame that's sort of opens up at the, I guess, so they can get in
clamshells,
a later.
yeah.
So they wouldn't have had I mean, just from you to me and that high, that's, what's that, about maybe 2,000 bullets?
Yeah. Well, so not a lot of ammunition. Each gun has its own sort of box, and
So you'd have to sort of pick your targets. You couldn't just sort of push the button and hope for the best. Otherwise, you
little short 2-second bursts. They tended, I think, to use the Brownings as a way of sort of sighting where they were aiming, and then before they pulled the trigger for the 20 millimeter underneath
every fourth
tracer.
one, tracer.
Yeah, so they used the small bullets to kind of aim, and then the 20 mil you'd fire that with your other button, and that was the one that really did the damage.
That comes out of,
so they're mounted in underneath.
Okay.
They're great big long.
So in behind the pilot there is all the hardware for
that. That's sort of 2 meters long. So they were actually hanging. The gun was hanging off the wing itself. The cannon. They didn't have much ammunition either, but at least when it hit you, you knew about it.
Yeah. We're coming up to the top. Is that steel?
Yeah, so that's just a tubular steel frame covered in perspex with the laminated glass, bulletproof glass windscreen, 1.5 inch thick, mounts on the front here. So the fighter had this big flat windscreen made out of laminated glass. So you had your big 1/2 inch thick, 70 kilos of armour plate in the front, and then a big thick bit of glass at the top, so that anything coming straight for you,
you got a chance,
more or less protected from.
Yeah. So I guess after a while you wouldn't be doing you trust the glass.
I don't know. It's not something I'm ever likely to experience, thankfully.
Wow.
But yeah, we've seen plenty of pictures of glass that's been hit by bullets, and it doesn't go through, but it ruins your outlook.
Sure. Warren, this whole wing is just one long wing.
Yep.
So and it goes through that hole there.
Yep.
So how do you fit this?
Put it together?
Yeah.
So this piece is removable. The side panel's removable. So you lay the wing up on some stands, and then you lower the fuselage down on top with this removed. And then there's 4 bolts that hold it, 2 on the top and 2 down the back. And then you put the side panel back in underneath and remake the fuselage that way. So yeah, you kind of lower it down.
So the wings are hanging from the top.
Yeah. Well, the fuselage really is just to support the tail and provide somewhere for the pilot to sit. All the landing gear, the engines, the ammunition, the fuel, everything, the cannons, everything that's heavy and does a lot of work is all bolted to the wing. And the fuselage is really just holding the tail to stabilise it and somewhere for the pilot to sit. So it's actually quite a light structure. Everything else is attached to the wing. So
basically, if you had a piece of, like when we were kids, we could buy a Mustang from the toy shop, which was a piece of balsa wood which you cut out. Yeah. And then you put the wing through a little slot. And
not a lot different, really.
Really?
Not a lot different.
And 4 bolts to hold. No,
4 bolts. Yeah, no, 4 bolts in total. Total, 2 on the top and 2 underneath. That's it. Yeah. Well, all you're really doing is stabilising it. The wing with its engines. I mean, if it was a flying wing, you wouldn't need a fuselage at all. But so the tail is just to stabilise it. So it's all the sort of structure is aimed at connecting the tail to the wing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the little panel behind it, I guess that's what probably what equivalent to a firewall.
That's the firewall. Yep. So the engine's mounted onto there, and the bottom of a frame has stays that go up to the back, and the landing gear and everything is all attached to these fittings here. And the firewall hangs down underneath, and the engine basically from here forward So these long bolts go right through the spar, about 6 inches long,
Yeah.
and another fitting underneath, and it's all kind of bolted up.
So how many bolts actually hold the engine?
4. 4 bolts.
Of course.
Yeah, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom.
And they tell me that's the same as a jet engine today. There's not many bolts hold those big jets on.
They are good bolts, though. They're not coach bolts from Bunnings. They're the real thing.
And so you were saying before that they are water cooled.
Yep. So liquid cooled. So in this space here, and you can kind of see the outline of it there.
Oh, okay.
The radiator sits in here, and it has a sort of fairing that runs down like that. So the air comes in the slot at the front, through the radiator and out underneath the wing. So 2 radiator on each side for the engine and an oil cooler
For the engine as well.
for the engine as well.
Yeah.
Each engine has its own oil cooler and its own radiator.
So coming in through this little...
Yep, through the slot here and exhausting out underneath.
Right, okay.
It has a little flap on the back of it that you can open and close the flap, so open for climbing and slow speed flight.
So for services, these bits, I guess this sort of clips on somehow. It's easier.
Yeah, well, it just hangs on these,
Oh, okay.
just hangs out the front. But I mean, it's a radiator, so
Yeah,
it doesn't need much service.
No, I'm just saying.
Just topping off every now and again.
Yeah.
So there's a big header, sort of kidney-shaped header tank on the front of the motor where you top it up with coolant.
Wow. And so the fuel tanks, where do they go?
So it's got 10 fuel tanks in the wings. Yeah, so the tanks are aluminium and they just hang on those straps underneath. They're all plumbed together. So effectively you just have one fuel tap, you turn the fuel on or off and all the tanks are joined together.
They all empty at the same time.
460 gallons of fuel, yeah. Yep, they all empty at the same time. So not a lot of fuel management necessary.
No. So how many gallons?
460 imperial gallons.
460, so that's 10 44-gallon drums equivalent.
Yeah.
Hang on to there.
Yeah.
You hardly think there was enough room.
Yes, exactly. 10 44-gallon drums. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Low Gear's sponsor is ProTrans Earth Moving. They're a Christchurch-based company and specialise in earth moving and demolition. They also specialise in remote-controlled diggers for those jobs that have an element of danger. And they have a variety of special-purpose trucks that can get into those hard-to-get-to places. So if you have an earth-moving or demolition job, check out ProTrans at www.protrans.com. On the 4th of November, we'll be leaving from Auckland to begin our 2017 Low Gear bus tour. Come with Linda and me as we travel the North and South Islands of this beautiful country, looking at some of the vehicles and machines you've seen throughout our Talking Trucks and Low Gear TV shows. This is a 2-week vintage and classic adventure, and we conclude this tour on the 18th of November in Dunedin. So if you or someone you know would like the ultimate trip down memory lane, give me a call on 09 536 5327 or email me at billhohipper@extra.co.nz, and for registration and more information just go to our webpage at www.lowgear.co.nz. So what we're looking at here, Warren, is 2 frames. It looks like we've got the old and the new.
Yeah, so these are the original engine bearers. So when we got the project, it still had its engines in it, and they'd been just on the stand since the thing was retired in the 50s. So the engines are away in the US being overhauled. But because we're trying to kind of replicate the style and look of how everything was done in the factory, we've kept one side original and unpulled apart, and we've overhauled all the components off the other side. And once that's completely finished and back to all plumbed and wired up, we'll leave that one as the pattern, and then we can pull this one apart, and we know we won't have lost the sort of the look of it. It's all about making it look like it,
like it was supposed to, yeah.
What you're looking at.
So these points here, these are the 4 points at the end.
So as you can see there, it's just hanging off 4 pins. The 27 litre V12 weighs about 1,650 pounds. Sits on the front here. It's bolted on with some long bolts down through into the engine bearers. And you can still see this is the coolant pipe down the side there, and oil coolant pipes on here. Some of the instrumentation stuff wound around these coils. feathering pump down there for feathering feathering the propeller.
So that's on that little control you were
Yeah,
talking
that
about,
control.
just talks to that. And
Yeah,
that
it talks to that. It pumps the.
Yeah.
If you have an engine failure, you can feather the propeller.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. And there's a little bag of nuts and bolts there. Is that what's required to put it all back together again?
Parts for hoop. Yeah, so all the plumbing that goes on here, got the part. You know, those are the new fittings ready to go together.
Wow. But you know, 1940 or whenever they were thinking about this, somebody's had to think about all this as well. How are we going to fit the engines? Well, we need a frame that looks like this. But you know, first of all, they had to think up the idea and then make it, and then does it work after they've made it?
Well, and the engine was a brand new, latest state of the art. You know, the engines kept on evolving and they kept on getting bigger and changing all the time. So a lot of this stuff you couldn't do until the factory delivered you the new engine.
Oh, okay.
And then you had to kind of cobble it all together and, overnight, because a new motor had become available. Because there was a lot more development in engines than there was in the aeroplane.
Yeah.
You know, they made a whole lot of different versions of the Merlin. And these ones are single stage, but they ended up putting two-stage engines in the Mosquito, and they were 9 inches longer, so everything had to be longer. And, yeah, a hell of a lot, rapid development.
Wow. Sounds like they're getting on with it out there.
Yeah, hope so.
Let's have a look at the back of that wing. Warren, I just noticed in the curve here, that's for the ailerons, I guess, to sort
flaps. So the flaps are in here.
Yep.
Yep. So the flap hinge mounts over there, and another one off the middle here, and a big wooden flap comes right out here.
Oh,
so
okay.
it just hinges down. It's has a hydraulic. These are the hoses for the hydraulic ram, which is attached onto here and forces the flap up and down hydraulically. Landing gears kind of goes forward from here.
Wow. And this is wood?
Yep, so you can see sort of the kind of tree colour in there. Yeah, and all this is just a plywood fairing, inspection panels, and then more fittings bolted through. This one's not on here yet, but you can kind of see how long the bolts are that have to go right through the spar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a unique design.
Amazing. So the fuselage, what's the length of it? From where to go?
It's about 40 feet, so it just fits into a container.
Okay.
Not that they were thinking of that when they built it, but
No.
It's good now because we ship it back to its owner in a container.
Now, this looks like an enormous piece of casting.
Yeah, so obviously this is the tail wheel.
Yep.
That's all magnesium. It has a series of rubber blocks inside for the shock absorber, so when the wheel bangs up, it squeezes the rubber together. It's retractable, so it has a latch at the top, a bit like a door latch, and a little hydraulic ram in there that lifts it up, hinges on this pin here, retracts up into the tail cone. So the fin mounts up on top there.
There's a little...
And that's for the trim, that's the trim actuator.
Oh, okay.
This works the rudder.
Yep.
On here,
Oh.
and this is the trim actuator for the rudder, so you can trim the rudder. The horizontal stabilizer bolts onto there, and some stays that come off here, and it sort of hangs on the back here like that. The rudder's fin's mounted up there.
And so the tail starts from here?
Yeah, tail starts from there and goes up.
Wow.
And there's a sort of a cone arrangement mounted on here.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Warren,
magnesium.
We'll go and have a look at some photographs so we can sort of have a look at the process.
Yeah, the way it was
before we do that, you've got a Spitfire you were saying over in the corner there.
Yeah, we've got a Spitfire that's underway as well.
Let's go and have a look at a Spitfire, folks.
Low Gear's sponsor is ProTrans Earth Moving. They're a Christchurch-based company and specialise in earth moving and demolition. They also specialise in remote control diggers for those jobs that have an element of danger. And they have a variety of special purpose trucks that can get into those hard to get to places. So if you have an earth moving or demolition job, check out ProTrans at www.protrans.com. On the 4th of November, we'll be leaving from Auckland to begin our 2017 Low Gear bus tour. Come with Linda and me as we travel the North and South Islands of this beautiful country, looking at some of the vehicles and machines you've seen throughout our Talking Trucks and Low Gear TV shows. This is a 2-week vintage and classic adventure and we conclude this tour on the 18th of November in Dunedin. So if you or someone you know would like the ultimate trip down memory lane, give me a call on 09 536 5327 or email me at billhohepa@extra.co.nz, and for registration and more information just go to our webpage at www.lowgear.co.nz.
Warren, the Mosquito, 1940s, made of wood, and this is made of aluminium, is it?
Yeah, so this is a Supermarine Spitfire, Mark 16, which is kind of one of the last ones that they made. This one was a 1945 sort of version, about as developed as they got, I guess, for the Spitfire. Once again, Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, or in this case actually a Packard Merlin, so American-built version of the same motor. This airplane flew for 3 months before the end of World War II with the Belgian squadron, and we're going through the restoration of it now, and it should be finished in about 12 months.
Wow.
So yeah, Spitfire obviously all built out of aluminium, and pretty common for the style of construction from the Brits at that time.
So you're talking about the wing with the other one, where it's just one big wing, and is this the same, or is this got one wing on one wing?
Yeah, the wings bolt on each side on the Spitfire, so the fuselage has got a kind of carry through spar, and then the wings just bolt on with pins on either side.
Four pins?
No, actually 16 pins in this case.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot more pins than, but of course that's holding the wings together, whereas on the Mosquito, because it's all one piece, really you're just holding the fuselage on.
You have to go there.
Yeah.
Warren, just looking at the cockpit here, it just seems to have an enormous array of equipment.
Yeah.
And when you sort of see them in the films, they just sort of I guess that's the stick.
Yeah.
They just sort of be swinging around on that and not just sort of concentrating on the person they're chasing. And I guess once you get used to this, it's like everything's done by, you just know what you're doing, like driving a car,
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the last of the development. So every time they made a modification, they ended up adding something, and more fuel, and more radio gear, and more of everything. So it got quite complicated inside by the time the war was over. There's a unit over there for blowing up your radio if you went down in enemy territory. You'd press a button and the radio would get extinguished so that the secrets and the radio wouldn't go to the enemy. All sorts of little things like that. Stuff for managing the fuel. There's a trigger over there for sending Morse code light signals if your radio's silenced, and all sorts of little things that were needed at the time. So it got real complicated inside. And we're trying to put it all back in again to make it look just like it would have, when you jumped in it in World War II.
If you look at the construction, all these little struts, I suppose you'd call them, it just seems to be very complicated. And how long would it take them to actually, in the factory, to actually knock one of these out?
Yeah, I really feel for them in the factory, trying to make them, the pressure on to get them built as quickly as they could. And they were never really designed with ease of production in mind, and everything was a development, and more stuff got added and added and added and added. It must have been a real nightmare to make them, because they are very complicated.
Sure.
Very complicated.
There's a wing hanging up over there. Can we have a look at that?
Yeah.
That wing looks very wide and not all that long, sort of like a bit squat.
Yeah. Well, the Spitfire's known for its elliptical shaped wings, but what a lot of people really don't realise is the way it's constructed and how complicated the structure is. So even though it's a metal aeroplane, it was made much like the wooden aeroplanes were, only instead of this part being made out of sticks of timber glued together, they made it all out of aluminium and bolted it all together. So you can imagine over the length of the wing how many parts there are, how many bolts there are, and how complex it was to put together. Wow. Right down to some terrible sort of places you can't even get a spanner on some of the nuts and bolts to do them up. These ones have all been, the British had a habit of staking all their nuts and bolts with little centre punches so the nuts wouldn't come off. So a very complicated way of manufacturing. I mean, a beautiful looking thing in the end, but it, buried inside is literally thousands of hours of work.
Yeah, so this is all the way down.
Yeah, that's style.
Each one of these is a single piece.
Yep. The parts catalogue's massive. So it must have been quite a nightmare getting them all together.
But if you give it to Mr. Ford or Mr. Chef, he would have just made a...
Yeah, we'd have stamped a big piece of aluminium into one piece he would have been into.
Yeah. Wow.
So yes, no, it's quite a complex way of making. I mean, further out there are some pressed aluminium ribs, but most of the construction is this style.
Good
So
God.
very complex,
Yeah.
but did the job.
I'm sure it did.
And you could repair it fairly easily, you know, because if a bullet went through this piece here, you could unbolt it, put another one in, and
you're away.
you didn't have to
Take the
patch
whole-
it up like you would do with a sheet metal part. But yeah, so good old Spitfire.
There you go. So this picture here, is that when it arrived, or that's how you got it?
Yeah, that's when it was in storage after it had been, once the private owner took over, they put it into storage, and then eventually it made its way down here once we had shown that, you know, they could be rebuilt.
Wow. So then we come to the rebuilding process. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, so, I mean, originally there was a hope that we could reuse some of the woodwork in it because it had been in a museum and was, you know, relatively speaking, in good condition. But, you know, the glue that they used originally was not all that waterproof. I mean, it was strong enough, but after, you know, 60 years of sitting around, it starts to soak up water, and, you know, you never feel too comfortable about it.
So the parts that you've got here that you've kept,
Yep.
they're sort of like rusting and, or not, but mouldy and moss, and you have to clean them all up.
Yeah. So, you know, you can't use any of the original wood because the glue's not good enough any longer.
Fair enough.
So you just scavenge every piece of metal work that comes with it, and then put it through the, you know, restoration program while you're building the new woodwork to go, the airframe to hold it all together.
So you were talking about moulds and jigs. This is the fuselage being built.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just like a boat.
Well, it is
Sort of,
in
you
a
know,
lot of
get
ways,
those-
except, yeah. So it's made over the outside of a male mould, and it's got slots in it for the bulkheads and areas machined out for all the pieces of spruce that go in to support the doors and the windscreen and that. And then it's all kind of moulded down with metal bands. And
You might remember, folks, a few shows ago, we were sitting in the spruce cruise at a place called McMinnville in America, and that was a very huge machine, and also made of wood. But would they have gone through the same process, do you think?
Well, I don't think, you know, because a mosquito is obviously a lot smaller than the spruce goose, you can, and the way this construction style with, so it's a plywood balsa plywood sandwich. So it's a composite sort of, and in fact the mosquito has the style of construction for the mosquito has a lot more in common with, you know, a 787 Dreamliner than pretty much anything that's come in between. This is the pioneering composite laminate construction.
So there you go, folks. If you're interested in building a warbird, Warren's the man to come and talk to.